So today's topic is single responsibility principle. Also, guys, click the link and write your name because I see two names are missing. I think Camilero and Chicks haven't written their names yet. Okay, so today's lesson is single responsibility principle, and it's one of the best practices that you should be following while writing your code. So what it means is basically that uh, a function should do one thing and do that thing well, and a class should do only what it says it should. It should have only a single responsibility. So, for example, we have our program class, and this program class main responsibility, the only responsibility that should have is starting to run your code. So you shouldn't really put anything more in this class other than instantiating the initial classes for your code and then running them. So first off, I'll start with a task that, let's say, you are supposed to do. So let's say you're supposed to make a system to register people, more like register inhabitants of an island, and log all the information about them, all the known information about them. You're also supposed to make a test to randomly generate all those inhabitants. And that's about it. So obviously you would start with a class, let's say inhabitant, and public class inhabitant, and inhabitant has properties such as age, set get for the public, and then it has a property, let's say weight, height, and also please stop me when you have any questions. Then it has a name, and
Someone doesn't like your phone.
yes, thank you. And lastly, it has a constructor. You basically say inhabitant, and you pass in age, weight, um, height, and a name. Let's say inhabitant also has an array of children, and those children are inhabitants as well. So we just make inhabitant an array of those, more like a list. Will be easier to manage because we don't know how many it has. So
Could we use I enumerable?
sure, it's a bit better because then we can pass any collection, not just a list. Inhabitant. So we go and do set all the things. I don't know why I made those capitalized, so I'll uncapitalize them. Parameters should be non-capital. So we go age is age, weight is weight, height is height, name is name, and we instantiate the children's in here. So we say children, new children, new this, I mean list. In this case, let's say list, we can change later on if we need it. So list inhabitant. Okay. Enumerable, thank you. So we have inhabitant, it has its data, and we set our task is to make a system to register inhabitants. So we could go like var inhabitant 1 is new inhabitant, and then we pass in all the stuff. Let's say 15, let's say weight is 50, let's say height is 175, more like 150, and name is John. And I'll make one method pass to add children, public void add child, and we pass in a child, which is an inhabitant as well, child, and we add it to children. But I think children will not have add method, or will it? Doesn't have add method, so let's make it a list then. Oops. Close this. Okay. So children dot add child. So now we have a way to add children and a way to make inhabitants. So we make our first inhabitant. Let's make a bunch of them.
Nice.
So this is 22, this is 27, this is 30, this is 20, 50. Thanks for that. 53, 22, 55. Now the weight and height can be the same. John, Samantha, Rick, Marty, Isaac, Tim will do, and 2 and 3 Johns, that's fine. Okay, of course Lolita, we have to have Lolita. Okay, so now we have a system. We say var, let's say, database. So we said we have to register them to a database, so let's make a mock database, data storage, let's say. So we just have a list of those inhabitants, and we would like to store them, keep a track of them. Data storage is a bad name, so let's rename it into inhabitants register. Registry, maybe? Registry. and we have a list of them. Maybe we don't want a public list of inhabitants, so make it private. Since it's private, we no longer need to expose it as a property, so we get rid of setting get, and we have a method add. So just like this one, we can pass in inhabitant and inhabitant, and instead of children it's inhabitants. So we add inhabitant, and we can, so the method name is add. Yeah, add register maybe, because it's registry. So we register inhabitants to inhabitant database, let's say, and we would like to also get an inhabitant. Get. So I'll just call it add. I think add is still a better name. Okay. And we get an inhabitant by ID, so let's also make an ID for inhabitant. Public int, public or private should the ID be? I guess public. Public int ID set get. Okay, let's make a GUID. Thank you for a tip. Yeah, that's fine. So GUID will be private. Private GUID ID. So when you make an inhabitant, you at the same time create its ID. So ID is private, so let's rename it to underscore ID, and you create a new GUID. So each inhabitant like this has a unique identifier, and those identifiers are stored within the database. Maybe not. So the get method will be, it should be based on the ID, I think, but ID is not that very user friendly, so let's just make it based on index. Maybe we'll figure something out along the way. So we pass an index and we get an inhabitant of that index. Inhabitants index. We return this. So now we can create a registry. Database, more like registry. New inhabitant registry. And we pass in each inhabitant. Tree, not earth. So yeah, thank you. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We delete 6. 10. Okay, so we added 10 inhabitants. We generated 10 inhabitants. We created register, added them to register, and let's say we would like to get all the information about those inhabitants, so we do a for each. uh, not for each, but for, since we know how many inhabitants we added, but they're not in, are they? Yeah, they're still in private register, so we cannot for each all of them because we don't know their array or their list, so their collection. So we do a forint. So index starts at 0, index less than 10, and index plus plus. And we go and say register var inhabitant is registry dot get index, and we go ahead and say console dot write line the information about that inhabitant. String interpolation is not supported in this version of C#. I think it's 6 point something language in this website, so I'll use string format to format my string. So we pass in a string to format. So we need to print all the info about the inhabitant. So name, then age, then weight and height, then height, then that's it. That'll do. So we print that out, double brackets, and let's test it out and see what happens. Null reference exception.
I have never seen this error before.
It should say a line too. Let's delete some lines. Run. Okay. Let's it should be working. So we created a bunch of inhabitants. Okay, let's comment all out until registry. Okay, it works. So we created inhabitants registry. Double checking spelling. It's correct. Registry. Okay, let's comment that out. It works. Okay, run again. But why does it pick on the adding? Doesn't make much sense. Did we misspell inhabitant maybe when we wrote it? Did we? Inhabitant.
It should say the line where the error.
Yeah, it should.
Maybe.
Okay, let's delete all except one, and then we know. Why is it giving us? Oh, ID. Wait. Children. New GUID. Why is adding an inhabitant gives us that? Oh, I know. It makes sense. We didn't instantiate inhabitants. We had to make the constructor in which we instantiated those. The list of inhabitants we didn't instantiate, so we tried to add to a list which doesn't exist yet. So that is the error. Why we got that? I copy pasted. So here goes. Can someone unhighlight everything, please? It's hard to read. Now if we hit and it works, okay. Sorry about that. So if we hit run now, we see it works, it does what it should. Log in the information about them. We did that. Make a test to randomly generate inhabitants. So we make a method to generate the inhabitant. So I'll write public static, more like private static generate inhabitant. Not misspelled. I'll copy paste it. Generate inhabitant. So we go ahead and randomize it. So we go ahead and say var random is new random. Next var random index is next random number in between. What do we min max value? Yeah, that's the one I want. So between 0 and age can be between 1 because it's born and 100. That's the age. So random age is this. Then we have random weight. Then we have random height. Oops. Then we have random name. Name index. So it will be picked from the following 5 names. So let's say var name pool is new array of strings. So we say Josh, Dick, Tommy, and Sally. Four I made, so one more. I think so. Unfortunately to Dick. Gabe for the Steam Lord. Okay. So I think this 5 will be not included, so we need to pick one on top. So name will be this. Name pool with random name index. Random height will be this. Random weight will be this. For random weight height, I will change it a bit from next. Okay, I'll change it a bit and say that it's from from 5 to 10, and it gets divided by 10 and multiplied by 4 times the weight, because we don't want to pick completely random height, because it should be proportional in some way to weight. So let's try playing with this. We'll change it later. Yeah. So what would it be? If weight is, let's say, 50, we put 50 here, we get 200, we get 50, 200, and that gets cut by half at worst, or remains the same. Let's change this to 8 to 10. More like 7 to 10. Then it's reasonable, I think. 7 by 10, it's 7. Yeah, it's reasonable. Okay. And this will be 12, because giants exist. More like 13. More like 14, because I don't like 13. Okay. That's reasonable. So we randomize, and let's test it out if it works. So let's make 10 more inhabitants. For int I is index. Again, I'll just copy paste this. And that's what programmers love doing, copy pasting. Index, so 10 I need only, and I go ahead and say that inhabitant is generate inhabitant, and I at the same time register the inhabitant to the registry. So I put this in here. Lastly, I delete this line, and the last line will handle the print of information. So if I hit run, anonymous member, line 61. Maybe it's also a feature of new. Oh, right. I forgot this. Okay. So we have a bunch of same people when we hit generate, and it's because we need to have a seed or something, I think, because it generates the same thing every time via random, because we need to pass in a different seed in that random. If I remember correctly, that's not the goal of this lesson, but that is the reason why random sometimes doesn't want to randomize. I don't remember the syntax, how you set the seed. Why do I still see this? Okay, seed. Why doesn't it give me autocomplete as well? Random. Why is it giving? Oh, so maybe 6 is inclusive. Okay. 0? Really? Oh, right, because it's a float. It should be float. because it gets divided by 10 and remainder is, yeah. Weight is way too little, so let's make from 50 to 100. Height is way too much, so let's make it 2 times less. Yeah, we're making dwarfs. Nice, that's good to know. Let's increase the modifier to 9. Okay, that's not that reasonable. Let's make the modifier to 11 to 12 for height. Yeah, that's more reasonable. Okay, that's good. That's good. So now I don't really remember how random works with the seed, because we need to add a seed to it, so it generates a new random um, thing every time, because now it generates the same thing. So um, it needs a seed. Um, so we can pass uh, ticks of our program, how much time passed. We can pass datetime, seconds, or something like that, and take a difference. But I don't really remember, so I'll quickly look it up. Randomizer, seed, C sharp. Oh, okay. Uh, nope. It should be uh, get time um, of your program run in ticks, something like that. I remember C sharp. Stopwatch is bad. Something else exists for sure. Environment tick count. Yep, that's the one I wanted. What's the namespace we need? Using system.environment is what I want. So system.environment tick count is what we're gonna pass as a seed. So environment tick count, and if we hit run now, it's still the same. Nice. If we go ahead and whoops and make the randomizer here, because I just read that's a thing, and hit run. 64, line 64. Oh, static. Oh, yeah, it worked. Okay. So somehow, for some reason, when you keep instantiating randomizer, it fucks up. So you are better off instantiating it. I mean, the way, if you want to keep generating random things for real, you should keep one of them throughout the whole program. So now what you just saw is shitty code, and now we're gonna do the actual thing, the actual goal of this lesson, to keep it in place, keep stuff separated and in place in areas of its responsibility. So first, if you go ahead and look at line 26, throughout line, basically the whole main method, you read main method and you think what it should do. and I don't know what it should do. And by reading all those lines, like I need to read 50 line, 30 lines to figure out what it does, and that's horrible. So it's obvious that in the main method we should only have the highest level stuff, like so that anyone could understand what it should do, even someone who doesn't know coding. So what we actually want to do is written in the comments. We're supposed to register inhabitants. So we're creating inhabitants here. We are registering inhabitants here. We are randomizing, randomly creating them, inhabitants, and we are registering random inhabitants. So that's what we do. And if you ever have the need of writing such a comment in your code, then you're better off just splitting that into sections. Not sections, but functions, classes that do that. So our first problem is this, and this, and this. So I think it makes sense to print information about inhabitants from registry center. So what we should probably do is deleting this and moving it to the inhabitant registry, because inhabitant registry should be able to tell us information about each inhabitant, not our program. That's not our program's responsibility. It's responsibility of inhabitant registry to be able to display information about them. So we get an inhabitant, and we now have access to this private. So we can go ahead and say till it's count. We index, we go, and even for is deprecated now. We can do a for each of our inhabitant in inhabitants, and simply say their stuff. And of course I forgot to write the method name, so public void info on info. That should be obvious what it does. Info prints info about inhabitants. Since it's inhabitants registry, well, it could mean address of registry, so I'll be more specific. Display info about all about inhabitants. Habitants. And even better, public void display info about inhabitant, because sometimes you might want to have information about a single person. So you pass in that person's index, and you get information about that person. Inhabitants of index. So here you go. And now, since we have this method, we could move it there, and I think it's actually a better idea to move it there now. So we change this to for loop, index from 0 to till index is less than inhabitants count. we plus our index, and now we can use this method and pass the index. So we just cleared up a little bit of code and split it into responsibility. Now we have this part and this part, and then this part too. So does anyone have a suggestion where should these go? To what place? What should handle them? Whose responsibility is that for generating inhabitants? Well, so far we don't really have a class which should do that. Registry, for example, might be a decent idea. Like inhabitants registry might be a choice, a pick for registering, for creating new inhabitants. But why would we want to put more code into this class when we can make a new one? Because this class already does what it should. Actually, it does a little bit more. Which is, it also displays information about inhabitants, so we can fix that too a bit later. So we would like an inhabitants randomizer. So we go ahead and make a class to manage inhabitants creation. Inhabitants builder, I'll call it. And I'll move the randomizer method because programs should not do this. It's not program's responsibility to randomize an inhabitant. And those two will also go here for now. I'll just put a piece of code as a placeholder because that's not where this code belongs. So we have inhabitant, we have a method to generate a inhabitant. So I want to use it, so it's public inhabitant generate inhabitant. Inhabitants builder generate random. Whoops. Now this part of code should go here because we hard-coded our inhabitants, and that's like the base information we have. So they are already created immediately, and that's with the base data we work with. So we register them all. I'll just make an array. Inhabitants new array, and I'll put each of them in the array. So here goes. Whoops, I messed indentation up. So we put each inhabitant into an array of inhabitants. It's not an array, of course, it's supposed to be a list. So I actually change this a bit and this a bit. Yeah, now it's more like it. So that's the initial set of inhabitants that we have. Of course, comma separates them, not a semicolon. So we have inhabitants. We don't need anything there. We need semicolon here. Okay. So we have our inhabitants initially, and we have our randomly generated inhabitants, and we have a method which randomly generates inhabitants. Randomize. There should be a better name. I'll just call it build. Build. Sure. And it returns a new inhabitant. And this one does nothing yet. So now we have two options. We can add inhabitants builder inside registry, and the requirement said make a test to randomly generate inhabitants. So we made a test which randomly generates inhabitants, like a class. That's what I meant by test. So now we can try our code out and see how it works. So we have inhabitants registry that we create registry. I hope I wrote it right. Okay. Then we have inhabitants builder. Yes, I'll change that. Thank you for reminding me. Inhabitants builder. So this random static in program goes to a inhabitants builder. We don't need to make it static anymore. We can make it private now, which is much better. Also, I forgot, we need a constructor. So public public this goes here, random underscore rn. So rn goes here, and we don't need that there. So we split it nicely. We move name pool from local to the builder field. Private name pool, put it here. We also don't create it immediately. We create it here. It's the initial pool, like that we're gonna use by default. And I think now it makes sense to use a list again to just in case add new names if we ever need them. So gonna put it here. Now we have a list of names, builder, public void add string name, and then we say name pool dot add name, just in case if we need to add a new name. And we can have a method for making this even better, to return a list of inhabitants. um, to build many of them count. So it would simply be like while count is more than 0, we keep building inhabitants and storing them into a list of inhabitants, and we say that inhabitants get an inhabitant added on every iteration. And lastly, we return inhabitants. And int count is count is good, and we reduce counter by 1 on every iteration. Okay. Do you have any questions? Someone said they were lost. Not sure what you meant. Ah, I see. Well, you didn't miss much. A GUID is a unique identifier, basically a parameter in such format, like a value in such format that when you create a new one, it always generates a unique value. So you can consider it as an identifier. It would be something like if you go to line 51, GUID would be something like that's something like that is what it would generate. What you see on line 52. When you say new GUID, it would generate something like this. So it's always unique. There are like quintillion possibilities of what a GUID can be. So when you create a new one, it's always unique. So you'll never run out of them, especially when you're working in the same application. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. I think U is for unique, and G, I don't know. So if we go back to our inhabitants builder, we have our build method, we have our add method. It adds a name, so add name method. Add to name pool, a name would make more sense. And we have our build method with a counter, so it builds many people, returns a list of randomly generated people. And last we have this part. So this part actually should go to registry as well. As convenient as it sounds, like we would maybe want to build a batch of uh, people, inhabitants, and register them at the same time, at the same place, but that's like our random builder should not do registration by default. It doesn't really make sense. It's not its responsibility. So it's better to move this into a separate place. So what this does essentially, it registers a bulk, a bunch, a bundle of inhabitants. So let's go ahead and do that. We and do that in where it belongs, into inhabitants registry. Inhabitants registry should be able to register a bunch of inhabitants. So we just go ahead and instead of adding one, we add many. So inhabitants. It's a list of them. and it's many of them. So we go ahead and say inhabitants. Oops, I lost my space. So in line 118, we add that method. So inhabitants, there is a method add range. So we add a bunch of inhabitants. And in this case, we can pass IEnumerable. Inhabitant. Someone please unhighlight the code because it's a bit hard to read. Thank you. So we made a method which adds a bunch of inhabitants to a list of inhabitants. Lastly, let's do what we did with the full thing that we did before. So we created a registry, we created inhabitants builder, and var new var oh, thank you for fixing those. So we want to generate a bunch of inhabitants, random inhabitants. We go and say inhabitants builder, and we say that we want to build 10 of them, just like in the previous example. And then we say inhabit the registry. I think since we only have a builder for inhabitants and registry for inhabitants, it would make more sense to just call it builder and registry. So I'll do that, and I'll just call this inhabitants. Actually, random is still good. Random inhabitants. So we go ahead and say registry add a bunch of random inhabitants, and then we go ahead and say registry dot how do we call it, display info about inhabitants, and that's it. That's what our program does. And splitting it like this makes it so much more clear what the program does, because if you look at it now, you know that you created a registry for inhabitants, you created inhabitants builder, you built 10 random inhabitants, then you registered all of them, and you display information about inhabitants. Like, it's absolutely clear what it does. So now let's try to make it work and see if it works. So if I hit run, it says name pool doesn't exist. Of course it does not, because I renamed it in line 63 with underscore name pool. So let's go ahead and rename it in line 90. So in line 90 I rename it to underscore name pool. Let's run it again, and here you go. We run our program and it does exactly the same thing what it did before, except now it's clean. Now it's split into parts. Lastly, yeah, I think it's pretty split now. Like, the last thing you could split is if you go to inhabitants registry, you could make a class to handle displaying the inhabitants. So let's make the last change to our code. So public class display, and this will be a very simple class. We'll just say void. I'll call it inhabitants display, and it will just say display. And it gets an inhabitant and displays info about that inhabitant. So inhabitant inhabitant. So that's all it does, and it will be a part of inhabitants registry. So inhabitants display underscore display, and I create it when I create the inhabitants registry. So inhabitants display gets created as well. So now in line 145, instead of doing that console long line, I just say underscore inhabitants display dot display, and I pass in inhabitant. Maybe I made a mistake. It was just display underscore display. So underscore display dot, I'll rename display to info. So I display info about inhabitant. Um, tent renaming. So if I hit run now, uh, info is inaccessible. I was supposed to make it public. Okay, in line 154, public instead of nothing, because by default it's private. I hit run and same result. Alright, so that's it. We've split our program into multiple classes with different responsibilities, and to sum it up, our inhabitant builder does nothing else except builds inhabitants, and you can add some like stuff to the pool it can choose from. Inhabitants registry does nothing else than registering inhabitants. It also displays them, and that's actually a bit bad, and you could move it, but it kind of makes sense and it's good enough for this. So it doesn't display it itself. On the other hand, it uses inhabitants display. So that's about it. Instead of writing everything into one class or two classes, we split it into several classes with each having its responsibility. And now when you look at your program and your main, you see that registry is being created, that builder is being created, and then that you build 10 random inhabitants, and then you register and display all of them. And it's clear, really clear, what it is, what it does, and that single responsibility. Each function and class does one thing, has one responsibility, and does it really well. And that that is that is all about this lesson, and that's it for today. Do you have any questions?
No, thank you. Good lesson.
Hope it was. I think it was okay. Uh, um, I uh, I didn't prepare for it, so I kind of messed up a few parts, like randomizing. I was not planning for that. Uh, I didn't really remember how it's done, but we figured it out in the end, so it's good. It's good.